when we're talking about discipline practices, it's those principles, tools, techniques that are being employed to improve and execute projects and achieve project success. For the discipline practices, we'll hit these examples, and I sprinkled in some quotes that we felt were really meaningful and hit home for us with the people that we interviewed. You probably have heard this. We probably didn't need to quote the person because you've heard this quote said by many other folks perhaps. So, projects too often cost more than they should, take longer than necessary to deploy, and deliver solutions that don't meet business needs. By way of hands, anybody heard this before? Not necessarily said by the person on the quote. Okay, it's very bright here, so I see some hands and then I see a lot of white spots. But okay, no, there's a few folks who have their hands up, and I think it goes back to what we said earlier about patience, right? As practitioners, we need to be patient and kind of push through some of this perception because unfortunately, there's a lot of fact and experience behind that quote. So we'll take a look at some of these key practices, the project initiation, stakeholder management, risk management, communication, and methodology, a robust methodology over the next few slides. And for each of these, we'll highlight one or more organizations. And so the Department of the Interior, in talking with them, two parts of the Department of Interior, the Maine Interior and then the Bureau of Indian Affairs, presented two very interesting examples of a discipline practice that worked well. The integrated baseline review that's performed in the CIO organization provided external validation, a key point. For a lot of the work that we do as project managers is having others who are, or being that person in fact, who's providing that objective external view into the success of the work being done. So if we're managing a project that deals with implementing IT, building a building, or might be reorganizing an agency, as project managers we can provide some of that external validation. In this group, they had a third party outside of the project team, project managers, and the vendors providing whatever services might be associated with that, to do an external validation. They would run through a very defined process, integrated baseline review, to determine whether to go or no go, send something back to the drawing board before they committed to fully going forward. Now, this cost money. It's not, you can't do this for free. It slows things down, another challenge, but it does improve the likelihood of success and hitting things on target. Their measure was basically it would only go forward if there was a high probability that they could succeed in their estimates of costs, schedule, and requirements within 10%. The key thing here, and those were good, there was a very well-defined process, well-defined criteria, but the interesting thing that they tried to do is to validate before the project moved into execution that the project was aligned, aligned with the organization's strategic plan, its budget, program goals, etc., that it was realistic, that in fact that's that 10%, that they could execute it, deliver the results, and do it within that threshold of 10%, and that it was realistic using appropriate guides and standards, guidelines and standards. And the other is viable. Okay, and this was based on a substantive risk assessment performed, that reasonable things being taken into account, the knowns that may occur, whether or not that would have a specific impact. But I want you to hold on to that whole aligned idea. I will come back to it toward the end of the presentation. But aligned, realistic, and viable, key elements of their IBRs. The Bureau of Indian Affairs had a structured initiation process. I'm particularly fond of this because it uses a primary technique that most modern PMs need to have, and that is facilitation. You need to be able to stand up in front of a group, lead them to an end result. Their whole process was a scripted 1 to 3 day event, depending on how large the project was, to basically set the project baseline and all the foundational project management artifacts that need to be developed in order to help a project to be successful, that they facilitated, the PMO and their project managers facilitated that process. So they went through their script, They documented along with the project team the results, your project plan, your base schedule, your risk plan, those things that we all should have and every good project should have going forward. So they did this process for all new projects. Any project, didn't matter what size, so that's why it would maybe take a little bit quicker for some, a little bit longer for others. I was talking with the CIO in that organization, and he said he got worried one day about a year into having executed these project launch workshops when they stopped getting the call. That people weren't calling the PMO to say, hey, we've got a project starting up, we'd like to get you guys to come in and do it, here's the date, blah, blah, blah. And after a couple of months of not hearing anything, he went out and started asking around, and lo and behold, what happened is the project managers were doing it themselves. It had become institutionalized, it had become a common practice, and the value, which is again a key element, the value was seen by many, not just the project management office, not just the PMs, but the people participating in the process saw the value. So those are two key processes that we like to highlight relative to initiating projects. GAO. I always wait for like a boo or hiss or something after. If anybody here from GAO, I should have asked that before I insulted you, but no. All right. GAO, this was a fascinating discussion that we had with these folks. And that is, they do projects. They do projects regularly and frequently, and they are, for the most part, the same types of projects, the content of which changes. Their projects are evaluations. Some people call them audits, some investigations, some inquisitions, but for the most part, from GAO's perspective, they conduct an evaluation. It's a project. They do a stakeholder analysis. They conduct a risk assessment as to what the risks are of completing this evaluation, and they're called on, as you know, by Congress to do these sorts of things most of the time. About 90% of their work is generated by Congress. All right. So what we wanted to talk to you about GAO is the complicated stakeholder environment that they work in, all right, and how they attend to it. Now, imagine that you show up to launch a project and you've been sent by somebody else, not in the organization, but you've been sent by somebody else, and the primary reason you've been sent is there's a problem, okay? So right off the bat, you're not welcome, okay? So that's their going in position. They're talking with people throughout the organization who instantly see them as the enemy. They are not particularly interested in communicating. This isn't always the case. Sometimes they have people who look at them and say, it's great, we have somebody coming in taking a look from the outside, and their end result, their product of all their projects are recommendations. So in some cases they are welcome to give their evaluation because of recommendation result. And then they are constantly being hit by their primary stakeholder, the person who sent them there, the congressman, congressional offices, congressional committee to do this evaluation. So they have real and perceived differences in the objectives of each of those stakeholder groups. The people who did the project or program that's being evaluated, the congressional offices that are sending them there, and then the team members and participants and end users of that program that they're talking with. And so what we found that was interesting is it really required kind of this, I don't know why I put a French word in here, adroit management. I used to take French, but that was last century. I think the language has changed a bit, but really good management. Being able to be adaptable, flexible, and understanding their specific client environment. Sensitive communication. What they talked about was being brutally honest with the organizations that they were evaluating. So here's what we're going to do. Here are some of the uncomfortable questions we may be asking. Here's what we're trying to do and what we hope you will do with the results of the effort. Contextual sophistication. When the person I was interviewing threw this out, we had a lengthy conversation about it, and I actually debate with my partner Tim about this. He hates this phrase. I love the phrase. It's why we're good partners. We are on opposite sides of certain things. And the key thing is they strive to truly understand the environment they're entering before they say a word, before they lay out a schedule, a plan, or do their risk management. All right, they want to know what it is they're getting into, and they want to create a team. This is a part of the contextual sophistication. They want to create a team that is appropriately suited for the environment that they're entering. So they involve some subject matter expertise. It involves people who might have direct knowledge, experience with the program they're evaluating, et cetera. So that contextual sophistication is an important element. Before we move off, I took the opportunity to ask you, okay, so when you're in these things, what's the regular things that you see, problems with the projects or programs you deal with? 4 things. It exposed the need for strategic planning, better strategic planning, performance measurement, internal controls, and reliable information. Note that there's not much about project management techniques or tools. Okay, a lot of these things existed in the organizations they were evaluating, but they weren't done in the right context or weren't attached to something more bigger than the program or project, something like the strategic plan. No presentation would be complete without an eye chart. So I threw this one in here, and I'll talk about it just real briefly. In General Services Administration, the Public Building Service created this risk breakdown structure. I thought this was again, not terribly rocket science oriented, but very interesting, and that is they broke out the risks by functional areas or by project areas. It's color coded. This was an initial risk plan, so everything's green. And about the program. Now, what you can't see, there are certain areas in there about like building security, organizational support, external factors, and they have interviews, so conducting their requirements gathering. Those are some of the columns that you see here. And this is how they start. They use this very graphical representation of their work, their risk analysis. One quick story about the building service, going back to our last category, which was stakeholders, is they had a very good story or interesting story about challenging stakeholder environment their experience with a particular type of stakeholder, and that is in building courthouses. They found that the judges had taken on to themselves to learn a little bit about building design, courtroom design, and construction management. And so they were finding they would go in with a plan and talk with a judge who would be in charge of a particular building, and they will start telling the project manager how to do their project. So a challenge for sure, and their approach was to, again, integrate that particular person into the group. Looks like hi, that's me up there, and there I'm back. Okay. Oh, I got it. You were focusing on me for a change. Okay, thank you. I prefer you don't do that because I'm not as photogenic as most. Nuclear Regulatory, you're not supposed to laugh at that, was not a joke. So, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This, also very interesting organization. A lot of, they were recently in the news about some executive level problems they were having. I actually went and had a meeting with the CIO last week, and just to check in on them on this particular process, which is their governance process. So. Basically a very formal process with senior participation, ownership by the CIO, 2 primary committees that take into account the IT side of things and business side of things. So I asked them, this was Darren Ash, so I talked to him a couple years ago, we've talked a few times since, and then again last week. And I said, so how's this going? He's like, oh, we scrapped it. I said, really? He said, no, we were doing it, we realized there was a huge gap. The end of the story is that he didn't really scrap it. They made a significant change, though, and that is where it says CIO here, there's a co-lead to the governance process, the CIO and the CFO. They realized that the skin in the game was missing, right? They had projects, they were making decisions absent a connection to the budget, right? Absent connection, a little bit of a connection to their strategic plan and their strategic priorities. So that was their improvement to the process. He said they've done it, and they just added this about, it's getting close to a year. And since then, the process has been improving in speed and in quality of decision making. That was one of the challenges. There were 2 challenges they wanted to address by adding the CFO. One was the speed at which decisions were being made, so having the CIO at the front end of the process helped that. The second was really the quality of the decision making and the engagement of the business side. All right, they really had missed the boat. So the message here to us as practitioners is in that early stage, in the governance stage, make sure the key stakeholders are involved, make sure it's connected to your strategic processes, particularly the budget cycles, because we know how complicated and time-consuming and what an impact that can have on our projects. The other lesson that he wanted to share as an executive to practitioners was about being transparent. He wants, he tells his project managers and his PMO to tell the executives whenever an issue arises and be candid about it and talk about the specific challenges and setbacks, and don't be afraid to ask for assistance. All right? It's, we have a mantra around our office, is no surprises. It's real simple. Is if you come to me today and say, we've got a problem, and here's what I'm thinking to do about it, better than coming to me 2, 3 weeks, a month, whatever, and say, we've had this problem for the last couple of months and we cannot figure out how to deal with it. So that was his message to his project managers, is be candid and to ask for help when needed. Department of Energy Office of Environmental Management, we want to talk about the robust methodology. And the interesting thing is we talked to this group. Now their job, I don't know if you're familiar with this group, but they're responsible for cleaning up nuclear waste. All right? They have actually literally turned nuclear weapons production facilities into national parks. I was at one in Colorado, did not see any three-eyed squirrels running around or some deers with two heads, but it was interesting to hear their stories. Every one of their projects is multiple billions, takes decades or a decade or a little bit more. And when I asked for examples of their work, I said, well, here's an example. We get in there and we've got these machines and people on the other sides of the machines that are collecting this literally dust that's collected in the facilities. And surprisingly, this is during a period of budget cuts, they're using Folger coffee cans to collect them. So that was a joke requiring some laughing. But okay, we'll move forward. But what do they do? All right, they put into place after years of having failures in their projects. When the deputy secretary had come into this organization at OEM, they were fewer than 50% of the projects were being successful or meeting budgets and schedules. They were cited for failures. They had been on the GAO watch list. Things were not good. One of the elements, and they did quite a bit of work, but one of the elements was implementing a robust methodology. They integrated government and contractor teams. There was a huge gap between the two, a lot of things falling between those gaps, and they created and implemented a certified earned value management system. Okay. The lesson that came from this deputy secretary was this, in describing the methodology, which was tied to key decision-making points. And I had come from a DOD background many years ago, and I said, this looks very familiar. It's like, absolutely. We took it lock, stock, and barrel from DOD, and over the years we've modified it. But we started with something that worked. Right? And that's the message that I would convey to you, not only for a methodology, but generally across all practices. The ones that I'm showing you here, the ones that you might be using today, is if it works, stick with it, promote it, be patient with your teams and with your end users or your or the parties, key stakeholders, but stick with it. The end of this process of implementing these key things, the turnaround was about 90% of their projects were now on target. Their organization had won 2 years in a row PMI's Project of the Year, which is unheard of. Unheard of that a government organization won it, but also that they won two different projects in a row. The other note here is their progress took many, many years, pretty much about 10 from the point at which the changes were identified to when they were fully implemented and where they started to really see the results. So patience, again, a word that was used earlier, is key.